people of the internet. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. Tonight's spooky, scary Reddit thread is brought to you by Ask Reddit, and the question is, alien abductees of Reddit, or people who have claimed to see a UFO. What's your story? As always, before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And if you have your own Reddit-like story that you would like for me to read in a future video, make sure to email this email right here, which is also available in the description down below. Lastly, if you're loving the content and would like to spread some holiday cheer, here's my tip jar information, which is also available down below. Anything is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Okay, that's enough from me. The first story says, first time I ever tried to write this down. First time telling anyone outside of family. I'm leaving out the time and location and some other details because I'm still scared of what might happen with it publicly, I guess. Summer before 8th grade, me and two of my friends snuck out at midnight to go walk around the neighborhood and go see these girls on the next block who were having a sleepover. We turn the corner in our neighborhood and there's a huge black blimp shaped thing in the sky, like the picture of the Hindenburg, but bigger and as close, if not closer, completely silent in the size of at least 4 to 5 football fields across. No exaggeration. Even though I was young, we stare at it entranced, asking each other over and over and over again if we see it, which we all agree that we do, standing there, frozen in one place. It's like black polished gunmetal, no lights, no sound, no anything. It's just hovering there. And then, I don't know what happened, but time clearly jumps. Next thing I remember is the craft slash ship slash government experiment slash whatever the hell it is has gone, and there's a tiny glowing white barbell thing in the sky, seemingly slowly falling to the earth with wisps of smoke coming off of it. Then, 2 brand new black trucks with silver gearboxes on the back like F-150s or S-10s but nicer came speeding down the street, going about 70 in a residential 25-mile-per-hour neighborhood. Then after that, I remember walking home to one of my friend's houses and going to bed. At that point, it was like 5 or 6 a.m. and the sun was coming up. We all made a promise to tell my dad in the morning because he worked for the city, but we never did. I don't know what happened later in life to one of my best friends who was there, but the other was my best friend and we sort of made an unspoken pact to never talk about it. Don't know how or why we did that. We all grew up and I sort of lost touch with him too. We did reconnect over Facebook and such over the years, but it was like there was something between us neither of us wanted to touch or talk about. Looking back on it, there's no way we could have been the only ones to see it. It wasn't that late at night, and it was over a heavily populated suburb of a major city. The idea of this has always scared me more than any sort of possible abduction scenario. That there were others and we're all voluntarily suffering a sort of collective amnesia, except now we're not. I've thought about hypnosis, but that scares me too. Plus, I'm not sure if I'd trust the results. I was just a kid then, and I'm not sure if I could trust the hypnotist. What I do know, again, is that there is no way it was just the 3 of us who saw it. We're talking a huge thing hovering in the sky directly above hundreds of houses just after midnight on a summer weekend night. But nothing on the news, nothing in the paper, nothing on TV, no word spoken about it again, ever, by anyone. This is a true story. I'm a little average around here, I think, but I know what creepypasta and stuff like that is. This happened, and there's no way I'm the only one who remembers it. No way. Thanks for letting me get that off my chest. The next story says, my mom tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they saw a bright light in the sky. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like, I don't know, or just drop it, for a long time. So a couple of months later, Mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets up with her again and immediately notices something odd about Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanor, like she was really happy and at peace for no good reason. After they talked for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mom says she doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said at first it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted that clearly as well. At first, they paralyzed her somehow and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently they told her all sorts of things, stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They also told her it was not their fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They also told her that they had abducted my mother another time after that first incident. Mom says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted. But she's almost sure that they're all just nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mom inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says, "You will eventually know." And she says that once she's learned of the truth, then everything becomes wonderful. Mom has seen her a few more times over the years. We still live in another state from her, and she apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like a central part of her daily life. Wow, 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 wow. The next story says, I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53, I'm on a rural stretch of a 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm being pulled over. So I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop, I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof in the electrical system of my car. So I leaned down to pop the hood so I could take a look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field surrounded by corn stalks left over the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started freaking out. Where am I? Why the fuck am I sleeping in the middle of a field? Where the fuck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from the road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350 north and 50 west. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking towards the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I had turned onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remember that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and I called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I've only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I'm sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy or they would call bullshit on the whole story. If somebody came to me with a story like that, or closely mirrored the stereotypical story, probably wouldn't believe them either. Dear Lord, please never let anything like this happen to me. Thanks. Love you. Okay. Next story. I occasionally suffer from sleep paralysis. It developed in my early 20s, and I've had an alien abduction dream. My dad and I loved to watch shows about aliens, so I assume people who claim they were abducted had some sort of sleep paralysis. It started with flashes of blue light, and I felt myself being lifted out of the bed by my chest. I was blinded by a white light, and I could hear a loud mechanical whirring. That's not what it sounded like. I tried. When I woke up, I was sitting in the bed with my chest stuck out. My arms were holding me up. The experience was the most intense sleep paralysis dream I've ever had. I could see how someone else could have had that dream, panic, and tell everyone about it. The next person's story is, I was traveling back home with my mom from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky, a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road for a few seconds just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes, disintegrates, disappears, whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mom and I could tell by her expression she had seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplane, or flock of geese. My mom and I still talk about the sighting we had, and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it is not a hoax or a fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. The next person says, not a very spectacular story, but true. I've always felt some encounter stories were real, but what made me truly believe was one night standing outside watching the stars. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m., and out in the country, so it was dark. No street lights. Very little to no moon. I was watching what I thought was a satellite moving across the sky, right to left. Didn't think twice about it, as I saw them all the time. Suddenly, the satellite stopped and shot off fast, totally disappeared, at a 45-degree angle from the direction it came. Never ever seen a satellite change direction, ever. It startled me so much I stood there for a bit, wondering if I really saw it or not. But I did, 100% certain. It's unfortunate no one was there with me that night. Not my story, but my dad's. As a consequence of this not being my story, I can't insist that I know what I saw and all that. All I can tell you is that I believe him, and he has no reason to lie to me. My dad has over a dozen stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois, near a woodsy area. UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad and my grandpa would sit on the porch and watch lights fly around their house for fun. This was a long time ago, when my dad was a kid. He's in his 60s now. They would watch the stars dart around like laser lights and laugh about it. Shit's mind-boggling to me now. I've only seen that kind of thing happen once or twice and it freaked me out. Besides that, a bunch of other weird shit happened to my dad. Some of it is pretty similar to stuff described in this thread, actually. Isolated earthquakes in Illinois that nobody else felt. Bright orbs floating around in the sky and following him around, etc. It had been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. FYI, I'm completely aware that it sounds like my dad was just fucking with me, and trust me, I'd prefer to believe that. But I have good reason to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything else. He wasn't the type of person to make shit up for show. He also had absolutely nothing to gain from making this shit up. He never tried to publish it or even write it down. He would just talk about it sometimes. Anyway, so, my dad was in his teens, and weird UFO shit has been happening his whole life at this point. He's out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people do when they live in a woodsy, rural area. His parents aren't home. They're out shopping, at work, whatever. Suddenly, this big black car pulls up into his driveway. Tinted windows, completely black. My dad just kind of watches it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here, not only is this a rural area, but it's 50 years ago. People were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays, you'd be crazy to leave your front door unlocked, but back then, it was no big deal. So, this strange black car pulls into my dad's driveway. It's making no noise at all, which my dad noticed right away. The door opens and steps out a super tall, friendly-faced white man. He has blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored black suit, and black sunglasses on. Right away, my dad could see there was something off about him. He looks too perfect. Flawless skin, a childlike smile, and he's very overdressed for a hot summer day. He looks distinctly out of place. The man walks up to my dad and asks for his name. My dad, around 15 at the time, asks him why he wants to know. The man smiles and explains that he just wants to ask him a few questions and he means no harm. Bemused, my dad agrees, but he's still very weary of the man. First, the tall white dude asks excited to be having this conversation. His childish, overzealous grin hadn't faded in the least. He asks my dad if he had seen, felt, or heard anything he felt was outside of the ordinary. My dad said sometimes, and again asked why he wanted to know. The man just kept grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty uncomfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life. He didn't appear to be any kind of government agent. His behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changes. His grin disappears and he looks worried. Without so much as a goodbye, he opens his door, gets inside, and drives away, still making no noise at all. A couple minutes later, my dad's parents come back from shopping. Now, for the really weird part, my mom saw the same fucking dude 30 fucking years later. She was in a bookstore, looking to buy something. Don't know the details really. When she turned around and noticed this tall, fair-looking blonde guy in a black suit sitting at a table in a cafe, 30 feet or so away from my mom. He was reading a newspaper. Sitting across from him was another dude, just exactly the same as the blonde one. They still looked strangely out of place, somehow too perfect, too clean. Now, my mom had heard the story from my dad before, and she actually recognized my dad's description of this man. He definitely stood out. So, she's kind of taken back, trying to figure out if it's actually the man my dad had seen all those years ago. The blonde guy notices my mom looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changes. He stands up, turns around, and quickly walks out of the bookstore with the second guy right behind him. What the fuck, right? I'm actually freaking out a bit, thinking about this. I'm 22 now, and I have to wonder if I'm going to run into this awkward blonde stalker. It's like the Men in Black sent their most inept agent to follow my dad around. Or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family in our natural habitat. I don't fucking know. I know this is all very vague. I'm going to bring it up to my dad and try to clarify a few details. I'll be honest, I've pushed this story out of my head because it weirds me out. It would weird me out too. It weirds me out now. The next story says, Edray, West Virginia. One night, a few years back, my friend who was driving and I were taking his girlfriend home when he decided to take the long way home. As we are driving along this fairly deserted back road, I begin to zone out and stare at this blinking red light off in the distance and casually think to myself, I wonder when they built a cell phone tower all the way out here, when suddenly it blinks and is dramatically closer than it was a moment earlier. At this point, my friend points it out and stops in the road. It blinks once more and is directly in front of us, over the top of us. The red light is so bright it floods in the car as a deep scarlet hue. I lean forward so that I can see directly into the light. In that brief moment, I feel a flood of negative emotions. The closest description I can offer is that of being naked under a giant microscope and having every pore examined thoroughly. I then look away from the light to my friend and ask him to drive. He barely responds, apparently in a similar state. Then he snaps out of it and starts driving. As we get a little ways down the road, I notice the light isn't fading, and the interior of the car is still clearly lit by it. I look out the window, and to my horror, the light is following us, and does so for approximately 1 to 2 miles. The light unexpectedly veers off to the left and comes down ground level in a patch of trees adjacent to the road. My friend stops the car and continues to stare at it and abruptly declares that he is going to get out and look at it, like he's in some sort of trance. I was 8 years old, playing in the sand volleyball court at the park down the street from my house. I was engrossed in my activity, burying my collection of Happy Meal toys in the sand, and then digging them back out. Repeat. I was looking down, but decided suddenly that I needed to look up because the world around me had lost all sound. There was no longer any ambient noise, no traffic noise from the busy street just a block over, no more dogs barking, no more birds chirping. I looked at the street that bordered the park, and that's when I saw it. It looked like a stealth bomber turned sideways, nose leading, one wing down toward the road, the other pointed up at the sky, completely shiny black in color, as tall as a house, shaped like an arrowhead. It was cruising the street at 3 miles per hour, just gliding over the road. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds. As soon as it passed behind some 2-story houses and out of sight, I got my hearing back, full force. I ran home with my piss-soaked pants and never spoke a word of it to anybody. The next story says, when I was a kid, I lived right on the edge of this state forest. My friends and I would go adventuring out there all the time, and as we got a bit older, middle school age, we started camping and just going hiking to unwind. One night, I went out for a walk by myself on a trail I knew with my eyes closed. I had left my house maybe around 8 p.m. I sat down in a small clearing after about 20 minutes of walking and stared up at the stars, at what I thought was an airplane until I realized it wasn't moving, but slightly pulsing. I could feel the pulses in my chest, like they were synced up with my heartbeat. I just kind of shook it off. After maybe 15 minutes, as a weird coincidence, I hopped up to meander my way home. When I got home, all the lights were off, which was kind of weird, until I went to plug my phone in. It was about 2 a.m. Okay, guys, I think I'm gonna stop there. Thank you so much for reading these stories with me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And if you have your own Reddit type story that you would like to share with me, make sure to email this email right here, which is also available in the description down below. The story does not have to be your own. Just leave me the details. Lastly, if you're enjoying the